Hey guys, game 2 of the World Chess Championship match between Dean Liren and Gukesh D has just ended. And it was very instructive and a fascinating one. The reigning World Chess Champion has unleashed some crazy engine prep that has made his opponent enter into a long think. He was ready to sacrifice 2 pawns in a seemingly boring position that leads to nothing. And it was some next level chess, some 21st century chess, some neural network style chess. Let me show you this game. I was very impressed by this. So let's dive into this. As you know, yesterday Gukesh has sensationally lost with the white pieces. Now he has black, and he has to not lose again. 2 in a row. If you lose the first and the second game in the match, it's practically over. There is hardly any coming back from that. So his goal is to at least make a draw, but maybe if Dean overpresses, he can strike back and even the score. So let's see what happens here. So Dean opens up with one e4. Actually, Dean more often used to play d4, c4, knight f3. These moves, most often I think d4, but this time in this match he decides to be more flexible. Maybe he will choose other moves in other games. Let's see. e4, e5, no Sicilian defense, no risking with black, so it would be much riskier. So Gukesh decides to go for a symmetrical approach, and we get the Italian game. And here, this is all very standard, dozens of thousands of games in this position. And here there is a surprise by Dean. He goes knight c3. He has never played this before, and actually nobody has ever played this move against Gukesh before, so it's not a position that he is very familiar with, but he definitely should be familiar with it. He has spent much time preparing. You know what's funny? The fact that Dean Liren reportedly, as he himself said, started preparing for this match 3 weeks before it started. So this is crazy. But actually, this is understandable because he was in a bad psychological shape. He decided to probably get some rest. Maybe it was a wise decision. So he had just 3 weeks to prepare. If we believe his words, maybe he's bluffing. And he prepared this knight c3 idea. It's not some crazy idea. It's been played before, but still it's not the most common move. a6 is what Gukesh chose. a4, d6. Sorry about my dogs barking if you hear them. Castles. And now comes an important point in the game. So black can castle, but that would allow bishop g5, pinning this knight. And it's possible that it may get unpleasant. h6, bishop h4, retaining this pin, and it's not very easy to untangle here, and the bishop cannot go back to e7 because there's a pawn here. So yeah, there are some considerations to be made here. So instead of castling, Gukesh tries to be safer and goes h6, prophylaxis against this pin. And now comes the point where the world chess champion strikes with some crazy novelty. So first he goes bishop e3. This is not a crazy novelty. This is just a developmental move. Obviously, if black takes, white takes with a pawn, and it's good because the pawn controls important squares, even though it's a doubled pawn. So black goes bishop e6. In turn, black is not against this exchange. And here comes the point where the novelty occurs, a5. This move, the engine doesn't understand it at first glance. The chess.com's engine says black is better because this pawn is here to die. The knight is putting pressure currently, but the bishop can add another attacker, and this pawn will die. It will die a painful death. But this is obviously some engine prep. You don't go a5 out of the blue, improvising over the board, giving up the pawn. So here there could have been many variations. For example, bishop b4. This is not what Gukesh played, but this is an obvious move, putting pressure on this pawn, wanting to take it. And the engine gives the line knight d5, putting pressure on this bishop. Takes, and now, wait for it, d4, sacrificing yet another pawn, because this pawn used to guard the e4 pawn. This knight can now take it, d4. You can take the second pawn. Black is up 2 pawns. Where is the compensation? What's going on? But the engine finds queen e2 here and says white is better. White has a good compensation on high depth. And over the board, it's so crazy. Imagine how scared Gukesh was at this point. He doesn't obviously know this idea. He spent some time thinking. It was some new stuff, never played before. He probably was not expecting this. And yes, he can take 2 pawns, but I would be very scared. Well, I'm not Gukesh. He has phenomenal psychological resilience, of course, but still, if he's a human, he must be scared here. Because what to do here? If there are some threats of the bishop moving out of the way, and then this knight would be hanging. So an obvious idea would be to drop back with a knight, but that doesn't work because this would be a fork, and white wins a piece. So knight f6 is out of the question. The engine says that knight g5 is the most obvious, most logical move. Well, I wouldn't even think of this ugly square for the knight, but maybe it's logical. And after takes, if white takes here, which is the best move according to the engine, black should make the most obvious move in this position, rook h4. This is some crazy engine stuff, activating the rook sideways. Actually, the bishop is not even hanging, so I don't know why rook h4 is so strong, but this looks interesting in all senses of this word. Obviously, a human would probably take like this, but then rook fd1 creates some nagging pressure towards this queen, and black is still up 2 pawns, but black is very uncomfortable in this position. So Gukesh spent some time, decided to not to go for this. And also in this position, after bishop b4, knight d5 takes, d4 takes, queen e2, there are other moves. Probably all of them have been analyzed by Dean and his team, Richard Rapport and his Chinese compatriots. There are moves like castles, for example, but then bishop takes h6, discovered attack on the knight, takes, and now black is up 1 pawn, but this king is not feeling too safe, so obviously there is great compensation. So all these lines and many more lines probably are in the computer of Dean Liren and his seconds, his team, heavily analyzed, memorized by heart, but Gukesh decided to avoid all that. So instead of going bishop b4 here, going for this pawn immediately, he decides to first trade these bishops, takes, and now again he can go bishop b4 actually, and there are other crazy lines here because white can go knight d5 again, putting pressure on this knight, and there are 2 ways to proceed. You can take this pawn again. This pawn is left hanging. This pawn is left hanging still, but this is good for white because white has queen d3 attacking this knight, and if the knight drops back to c5, for example, there is queen f5. And white is better, even though the second pawn is also hanging, but the pieces of white are so active, so dominant, so menacing. The rook will join probably. So Gukesh didn't want to go for this, obviously. And there is another line here. So bishop b4, knight d5. The other line was this, but you can also take on a5. And this pawn still is hanging. But this is much worse for black because knight h4 prepares to land on f5, another computer idea. Very beautiful, very non-obvious chess, I would say alien chess. This is how aliens, super intelligent aliens, would play this game. So of course, both Dean and Gukesh are humans. So instead of going for these crazy lines, Gukesh opts against and just castles. He does not take this the sacrifices. Castles, we trade here, and we get a position that probably still was in Dean's files. He has spent just 3.5 minutes up to this point, so probably he spent some time trying to remember what he had in his files, and he went for b3 also very fast. So this is actually the engine recommendation to strengthen this pawn, and white is a little bit better. Why? Well, because of some positional subtleties, because these pawns are a little bit worse than these pawns. These 4 pawns on the queen side for white. Gukesh tries to exchange some pieces to go into an endgame because there is an equal amount of pawns and pieces here. And he wants to trade more rooks. And here, Dean entered a think, because apparently he didn't remember exactly what he should do. There are many candidate moves here. You want to put your knight on d5, but the knight is defending a4, e4, which is important. Also, your rook is defending a5. So you have to do something. Black is threatening to take. And if you take by the knight, the pawn will fall. And if you take by the rook, the a5 pawn will fall. So you have to do something. And Dean went rook d to c1 after thinking for 10 minutes. A little bit passive and not the best move. But it's easy to criticize him. I doubt I would have found the correct continuation. The correct continuation, again, is some crazy engine stuff. Knight e1, allowing taking. And again, if I take by knight, this falls. So the engine says, I'll take by the rook. And you can take my a5 pawn. Black is up a pawn, but I have knight d3. I'm taking 2 pawns. You can defend them both with knight d7. But then I have knight d5. I'm taking this pawn. You cannot defend by the rook because otherwise that would lead to a fork, winning the rook. So rook c8, knight e7, of course, loses. So you have to do something about this pawn. If you go c6, I check you. You go here, and I go knight b2. Wow, this is some interesting stuff. Attacking this knight. And once it moves, you go rook a1. This is just one of the crazy engine lines. And this knight has no squares. It has no squares to go to. All these squares are occupied by either white's or black's pawns. So black has to go b6, defending this knight. But apparently after knight a4, putting pressure on these pawns, some of these pawns will fall, at least one of them. And white is better. White will regain the pawn in the long term. In the long run, there are some other engine lines, but I will not show you everything. This is some crazy stuff. So, of course, knight e1 is a difficult move to make, very, very subtle. So Dean chooses a human approach, rook d to c1. Still, white is a little bit better, but it's around equal. The knight jumps into d4. Of course, white could take, but then rook e8 comes and this pawn would fall. So instead of that, knight e1 with a similar idea, but it's not as good under such circumstances. Rook d6, he probably wants to double up. Black doesn't have to do anything because white has to prove that white has a plan. King f1, slow maneuvering game. g6, again, a waiting move. Rook d1. Doubling up on the d file, black waits patiently. f3, overprotecting the e4 pawn. Now this knight can no longer be glued to it. Maybe it can go to d5 in some variations. King g7, just waiting again. King f2, h5, knight e2. Okay, probably white wants to reroute the knight somewhere. Knight c6, going back. Knight c3, going back. What is going to happen? Knight d4. Are they going to repeat the moves? Knight e2. Will the knight go back? Are they going to repeat the moves and make a boring draw? Knight c3, knight d4, and they repeat the moves and it's a draw. But it's not a boring draw, guys. Yes, it's a draw in 23 moves, but this is such a high-level game of chess. This is some future chess. Very, very, very entertaining, if you ask me. Even though there were no fireworks, but there were fireworks in the head, in the mind of the participants. And probably they are both relieved at this point. Dean is relieved that he's retaining his lead, 1.5 to 1/2 now. And Gukesh is relieved that he hasn't lost this one, and he still has 12 more games to regain the initiative in the match, to get some wins, and to try to become the next World Chess Champion. Please write it in the comments your opinion about this game and your forecast. Who will win? See you in the next one.